There's a pattern in personal finance that almost nobody talks about. Not because it's secret, the data is public, but because it doesn't fit neatly into a motivational framework. The pattern is this: people who cross $10,000 in savings behave differently from people who haven't crossed it. Not a little differently. Fundamentally differently. Their risk tolerance changes, their consistency changes, the way they relate to money shifts at a level that shows up in the data before it shows up in their own awareness. And that number, $10,000, isn't arbitrary, it's a threshold. Nobody explains how this actually works under the hood, and that's the part that matters. I'm Warren, and today I'm going to take this apart piece by piece, the behavioral finance, the real numbers, and the protocol for getting there. Not motivation. Mechanism. Start with what the data shows. Researchers looking at savings behavior across tens of thousands of households found a consistent inflection point. Below $10,000 in liquid savings, households show high volatility, deposits followed by withdrawals, sporadic contributions, long stretches of zero activity. Above $10,000, the pattern stabilizes. Contributions become more consistent. Withdrawals drop. The account starts growing in a way that looks, on a graph, like a different person took over. But it isn't a different person. It's the same brain operating under a different set of conditions. There's a moment most people recognize. 11:30 at night, the apartment is quiet, and the banking app is open on the phone. The balance reads $4,200. There was a dentist bill last week. The car insurance renewed. And the number that was 5,810 days ago is now 4,200. That feeling, the low pull in the stomach, the sense that the ground keeps shifting, that's the brain in emergency mode. It isn't reading the number as progress, it's reading it as a countdown to the next crisis. The mechanism behind this is something behavioral economists call mental accounting, the tendency to treat money differently depending on which mental category it belongs to. Below $10,000, savings sit in the brain's emergency buffer. That money feels temporary, like sandbags stacked before a flood. The brain doesn't invest emergency money. It hoards it anxiously and spends it the moment pressure arrives. But there's a point where the balance crosses a threshold and the brain reclassifies the account, from buffer to capital, from temporary to permanent. For most people, that crossing happens around $10,000 because that's roughly where 3 months of basic expenses feel covered, and the brain stops scanning for threats. Here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part most financial content skips entirely. 3 things change when the brain makes that reclassification. Think of them as 3 doors that unlock at roughly the same time. Door 1, risk tolerance. Below $10,000, putting money into the stock market feels reckless, like handing cash to a stranger in an alley. The brain runs a survival calculation, and the answer is almost always no. Above $10,000, that calculation shifts. A temporary 5 or 10% dip no longer threatens rent. The brain gives permission to invest, not because someone watched a video about index funds, but because the math changed and the survival alarm went quiet. An Austin-based software engineer, 31, lived inside that calculation for 18 months. His savings bounced between $4,000 and $7,000. Every time it approached 8, something pulled it back. A car repair, a vet bill, a tax shortfall. Textbook volatility below the threshold. Then he set up a separate high-yield savings account with automated bi-weekly transfers of $200, walled off from daily spending. 5 months to push past $10,000. Within 4 months after crossing, his balance reached $18,000, not because his income changed, but because the withdrawals stopped. The alarm turned off and the brain stopped rating its own reserves. Door 2. Compound interest visibility. This is the door that creates the flywheel. Below $10,000, returns are invisible. 2% on $5,000 is $100 a year, less than $1 a day. The brain rounds that to 0, and when the brain rounds something to 0, that behavior stops getting reinforced. Above $10,000, the numbers start moving in ways that actually register. 7% on $15,000 is over $1,000 a year, roughly $3 a day. Still modest, but visible. The balance ticks upward every month without any additional effort, and that visibility flips the switch from sacrifice to building. Here's what that looks like in practice. You put $100 a month into an account for 12 months, and the year-end balance shows $1,204. The $4 in returns feel like nothing. The brain files saving under pointless sacrifice. But put that same 100 a month into an account that already holds 12,000, and the year-end balance shows 13,040 something. The brain notices the number grew by more than what went in. That moment is when the feedback loop switches on. No decision required. It just happens. Door 3, and this is where the real weight sits, identity. Below 10,000, financial identity runs on constraint. Can't afford that. Don't have enough. Money's always tight. Those aren't just feelings, they're operating instructions that shape thousands of micro decisions a day. From whether to check the price before adding something to a cart, to whether the word invest feels like a real verb or a fantasy. Above 10,000, the instructions start shifting toward agency. I'm building something. I have options. I choose where this goes. It doesn't happen in a week. But within 12 to 18 months of sustaining a balance above the threshold, the patterns look structurally different. The person isn't just saving more, they're running different software. There's a small, quiet moment that marks this shift. It's the first time someone checks their balance and feels something other than anxiety. Not excitement, not celebration. Something closer to calm. The number on the screen isn't a countdown to the next emergency, it's a foundation. Wednesday morning before work, coffee in hand, the app opened for 3 seconds. And for the first time, the thought isn't how long until this disappears. It's, this is mine. Now here's the piece that connects everything, and it's the part most people miss entirely. Below $10,000, a household isn't just building slowly. It's actively being drained. The financial system below this threshold operates like a fee engine. Overdraft charges average around $250 a year for low-balance households. Credit card interest on a $3,000 revolving balance at 22% runs about $660 a year. Late fees, minimum balance fees, check cashing fees for those without a bank account. A household below $10,000 is paying roughly $1,000 to $2,000 a year in extraction costs that a household above $10,000 simply doesn't pay. Those fees aren't accidental. They're structural. The system is more expensive at the bottom and cheaper at the top by design. Here's what that looks like in someone's actual life. A $35 overdraft fee hits on a Friday because a subscription renewed a day before payday. The balance was $11 short. $35 gone. That same month, a $29 late fee on a credit card because the minimum payment posted 1 day after the due date. Another $18 in interest that accrued while the balance sat untouched. In total, $82 in fees for the month. Not for spending, for timing, for being close to zero. That $82 a month, annualized, is nearly $1,000 a year. Money that vanishes without buying a single thing. And nobody sends a statement saying, this is what being below $10,000 cost you this year. The charges are scattered across accounts, buried in line items, spread thin enough that no single one feels outrageous. But in aggregate, they're the most expensive subscription nobody signed up for. Run the numbers on what that extraction costs over 20 years. $2,000 a year redirected from fees into an index fund, earning 7% average returns becomes approximately $98,000. I've run this calculation for dozens of households, and the result always lands in the same range between $80,000 and $120,000, depending on the fee structure. That's the literal price tag of staying below the threshold. Not abstract. A direct transfer from the person to the institution, month after month, in amounts too small to trigger outrage but too large to ignore at scale. Picture a bucket with a slow leak at the bottom. The leak is fees, the water is income. No matter how fast the faucet runs, the bucket doesn't fill. Crossing 10,000 patches that leak. A nurse in Minneapolis, 28, shows what the slower version looks like. 2 years of investing $50 a month into a brokerage account. The balance crawled, then a tax refund of $2,800 pushed the total past $5,000. She doubled her monthly contribution. 6 months later, the balance crossed $10,000. The behavioral change was immediate. She opened a second investment account, started tracking net worth monthly, and increased her contribution 3 more times over the following year. None of that was planned. The threshold changed the feedback loop, and the feedback loop rewired the behavior. She described it later as the difference between pushing a boulder uphill and watching it roll downhill. Same object, same hill, but suddenly gravity was working with her instead of against her. Here's the protocol. One path, not a menu. Start by calculating your monthly baseline: rent, food, transportation, debt minimums. Everything above that number is the gap. 70% of the gap goes to a dedicated savings account until $10,000 is reached. 30% goes to accelerated debt payments. Not 50-50. 70-30. Crossing the threshold faster triggers the behavioral shift, and that shift makes every subsequent dollar more productive. If you're more conservative, shift to 60-40, but don't go below 60 to savings. The threshold is the priority. Automate the transfer. Set it for the day after payday. Automation isn't a convenience, it's the core of the protocol because it removes the decision point. Every time the brain faces a choice between saving and spending, the outcome depends on willpower. And willpower is a resource that depletes against a consumer economy engineered to drain it. Automation bypasses the negotiation entirely. The money moves before the brain starts bargaining. If your bank allows it, name the account something concrete, threshold, or build. It sounds small, it isn't. Don't touch the account. This is the hardest instruction and also the most critical. The protocol only works if the balance reaches 10,000 and stays there long enough for the brain to reclassify it. A premature withdrawal, even a justified one, resets the psychological clock. Keep a separate buffer for genuine emergencies. The threshold account isn't for emergencies, it's for crossing the line. And yes, there will be a month where something breaks, something costs more than expected, and every instinct says to pull from the threshold account. That's the test. Not the saving, the not touching. The person who passes that test once finds it easier the second time, because the brain files the account in a different drawer, and that drawer is the whole point. At $500 a month, 70% of a gap that comes to about $700, the timeline is 20 months, not a sprint, not a decade. 20 months, the length of a streaming series, specific enough to mark on a calendar. And once the threshold is crossed, the compound curve bends. 10,000 to 50,000 takes about 4.5 years at consistent contributions and average market returns. 50 to 100,000 takes roughly 3. The acceleration isn't linear, it's the shape of a hockey stick, and the blade only starts curving after the line is crossed. Here's something that almost never gets said plainly enough. The first 10,000 is the hardest money anyone will ever save. Not because the amount is large, it isn't, but because the entire system is optimized to prevent that crossing. The fees work against it. The visibility of returns works against it. The brain's own emergency wiring works against it. Every dollar saved below 10,000 is a dollar saved uphill against wind in the dark, but every dollar saved above 10,000 is a dollar that starts pulling other dollars toward it. The physics of saving literally reverses at the threshold. That's why the timeline matters. 20 months of resistance, and then the resistance drops. Not gradually, structurally. If you're at 3,000 right now, you're 17 months away. At 7,000, 6 months. The number is reachable. The timeline is concrete. Come back to the pattern from the opening, the one almost nobody discusses. The reason it stays hidden is that it isn't dramatic. There's no single moment of transformation. There's a slow, quiet reclassification inside the brain, triggered by a number on a screen crossing a line that nobody drew on purpose. The emergency buffer becomes a foundation. The alarm turns off. The compound curve becomes visible. And the person, same job, same city, same income, starts building instead of surviving. That's not motivation. That's architecture. And it doesn't care whether someone feels inspired on a Tuesday morning in February. It runs regardless. The most important number in personal finance isn't $1 million. It isn't even 100,000. It's the first 10,000, the threshold where the brain switches operating systems and the extraction machine loses its grip. Everything after that is compounding. Everything before it is friction. If that line isn't crossed in the next 18 to 24 months, the fees keep compounding against you, and every year below the threshold costs roughly $2,000 in extraction and $7,000 in missed growth. Over 5 years, that's $45,000, not lost to bad decisions, but transferred quietly to the institutions designed to keep the balance low. Open your banking app tonight. Look at the last 12 months of fees. That number is the annual cost of the line you haven't crossed yet. Tomorrow, the numbers that show where the average person actually stands right now. Median net worth by age, average debt by category, savings rate by decade. If the $10,000 rule is the mechanism, Tomorrow's the map, who's above the line, who's below it, and why the picture is worse than almost everyone assumes.